Asterisk, a gentle warmth settles over you as this story begins. A tale woven from the threads of chance, courage, and a love that defied every shadow. Before we journey deeper, tell me in the comments, where in this world are you listening from tonight? Knowing you're there, wherever you are, makes this story feel even more real. Asterisk. There are moments in life when a single breath changes everything. When the ordinary shatters like glass, and through the cracks, destiny slips in uninvited. This is the story of a woman named Elena Moreau, a quiet soul with gentle hands and a voice that carried the melody of another homeland. She never imagined that speaking her grandmother's language one autumn evening would pull her into the orbit of a man who lived in shadows, a man named Dante Caruso, whose world was built on secrets, power, and a loneliness so deep it had almost convinced him he was incapable of feeling anything at all. Elena moved through her days like water, steady, soft, unremarkable to most. She worked long hours at a bistro in the heart of the city, a place called La Rose Bleu, where the smell of butter and thyme hung in the air and the chatter of diners blended into a symphony of normalcy. Her life was small, but it was hers. She had her mother, her aging grandmother Meme, and a tiny apartment with a window that overlooked the cobblestone street below. She had routines. She had safety. But on this particular Friday night, as rain began to tap against the windows and the bistro filled with patrons seeking warmth and wine, something shifted in the air. Elena felt it before she understood it, a tension, a stillness, like the moment before thunder. In the far corner of the restaurant, a table had been reserved, not by name, but by presence. 4 men sat there, draped in expensive fabrics, their faces half hidden by the low amber light. They spoke in hushed tones, and the other guests seemed to instinctively avoid looking their way. Elena noticed them the moment she stepped onto the floor, carrying a tray of oysters and champagne. The man at the center of the table, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of aged whiskey, watched the room as though he owned it. Perhaps, in some unspoken way, he did. She didn't know his name then. She didn't know that he was Dante Caruso, a man whose reputation moved through the city like smoke, intangible, but everywhere. A man who commanded empires from the shadows, whose word could change fates, whose enemies disappeared like fog at dawn. Elena served tables with quiet efficiency, her mind occupied with bills to pay and her grandmother's medication that needed refilling. She smiled at patrons, refilled glasses, wiped down surfaces. She was invisible in the way service workers often are, seen, but not truly noticed, until the elderly woman at table 9 began to weep. Elena had just delivered a bowl of cassoulet when she saw the woman's hands trembling, her eyes glassy with frustration. Beside her sat an older man, her husband perhaps, looking equally lost. The woman spoke in halting, broken English, trying to explain something to a passing waiter who only shrugged apologetically and moved on. Elena's heart clenched. She recognized that look, the helplessness of being in a place where your words don't reach. Without thinking, she approached the table and knelt slightly, her voice soft and warm. "Madam, puis-je vous aider?" she asked gently. Asterisk, can I help you? Asterisk. The woman's face transformed. Relief flooded her features as she responded in rapid French, explaining that the menu was confusing, that she needed something without dairy, that she felt embarrassed for not understanding. Elena listened, nodding, her accent flowing naturally from years of speaking French at home with Meme. She reassured the woman, promised to bring something special, something made with care. The elderly couple's gratitude was immediate and profound. The woman reached for Elena's hand and squeezed it, whispering, asterisk merci, ma chérie, merci, asterisk. Elena smiled, that warm, unguarded smile she reserved for moments when she could make someone's burden a little lighter. She didn't notice the man in the corner watching her. She didn't see the way his gaze sharpened, the way he leaned forward slightly, as though he'd just heard a song he thought he'd forgotten. But Dante Caruso saw her. And more than that, he heard her. The sound of her French was like a key turning in a lock he didn't know existed. It wasn't just the language. It was the tenderness in her tone, the patience, the kindness. It stirred something in him that had been dormant for years, something he thought he'd buried beneath ambition, violence, and survival. Asterisk, if you're feeling this story touch something inside you, don't forget to subscribe. Stories like this need hearts like yours to keep them alive. Asterisk. Dante set down his glass of wine, his jaw tightening. One of his men, a sharp-eyed enforcer named Anton, noticed the shift immediately. "Boss?" Anton asked quietly in Italian, leaning in. "Something wrong?" Dante didn't answer right away. His eyes followed Elena as she disappeared into the kitchen, her dark hair tied back, her movements graceful despite the weight of exhaustion she must have been carrying. When she emerged moments later with a steaming plate for the elderly woman, Dante made his decision. "Bring her to me," he said, his voice low and firm. Anton blinked, surprised. "The waitress?" "Yes." "Now." Dante's gaze didn't waver. 30 minutes. After she finishes with that table. Don't frighten her. Just bring her. Anton exchanged a glance with the others but nodded. In Dante's world, questions were rare. Orders were followed. Elena had no idea that her life had just been marked. She returned to the kitchen, spoke to the chef about preparing something kind and nourishing for the Frenchwoman, and continued her shift as though the universe hadn't just tilted on its axis. But 30 minutes later, as she cleared a table near the bar, a shadow fell across her path. She looked up to find a man standing there, tall, solid, with a face that revealed nothing. "Anton." "Mademoiselle," he said, his voice polite but unyielding. "My employer would like a word with you." Elena's stomach dropped. She glanced toward the corner table, where the man with the whiskey eyes sat watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. I'm working," she stammered, clutching the empty glasses in her hands. "It will only take a moment," Anton said, though the way he said it made it clear this wasn't a request. Her pulse quickened. She looked toward the kitchen, toward her manager, but no one was paying attention. The restaurant hummed with life, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in the corner. Elena set the glasses down and wiped her hands on her apron. Her instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, but something else, curiosity, perhaps, or the strange pull of fate, made her nod. Anton led her across the floor. With every step, Elena's heartbeat grew louder in her ears. She felt the weight of eyes on her, though no one was looking. The air around that table seemed heavier, darker, and then she was standing before him. Dante Caruso rose to his feet, a gesture so unexpected it caught her off guard. Men like him, men who commanded rooms with a glance, didn't stand for waitresses. But he did. "Mademoiselle," he said, his voice a low rumble, touched with an accent she couldn't quite place. "Thank you for coming." Elena swallowed hard. Up close, he was even more striking. Sharp cheekbones, a scar that traced his jawline like a whisper of violence, eyes that seemed to see straight through her. Is there something wrong with your meal?" she asked, her voice barely steady. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "No, everything has been perfect." Silence stretched between them. Elena felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. "I heard you speak French," Dante continued, his gaze never leaving hers, to the woman at table 9. Elena blinked. "Oh, yes. She needed help, so You were kind to her." The simplicity of the statement disarmed her. She nodded slowly. "She reminded me of my grandmother." Something flickered in Dante's expression, something almost like pain. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Please, sit." "I really shouldn't." "Please." It wasn't a command. It was a request. And somehow, that made it harder to refuse. Elena sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Dante lowered himself back into his chair, his movements deliberate, controlled. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elena. Elena Moreau." He repeated it quietly, as though tasting the syllables. "Elena." She waited, her heart hammering. She didn't know what he wanted, but she knew, instinctively, that this man was dangerous. Not in the way of a raised voice or clenched fist, but in the way of storms that build silently on the horizon. I grew up in Paris, Dante said suddenly, his voice softer now. My mother used to speak to me in French. She would sing to me when I couldn't sleep. Elena's breath caught. She hadn't expected vulnerability. Hearing you tonight. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. It reminded me of her. I'm glad, Elena whispered, though she wasn't sure why she said it. Dante's eyes met his, and for a moment the noise of the restaurant faded. There was only him and her, and the weight of something unspoken passing between them. Do you know who I am? He asked quietly. Elena hesitated. No. He studied her face, searching for a lie. Finding none, he nodded slowly. Good. Before she could ask what he meant, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black card. He placed it on the table between them. If you ever need anything, he said, his voice steady, call that number, day or night. Elena stayed at the card. No name, just a number. Why? She asked, bewildered. Dante stood, signaling the end of their conversation. Because kindness is rare, and I don't forget it. He turned to leave, but paused, glancing back at her one last time. Bourne knew it, Elena. And then he was gone, disappearing into the night with his men like shadows retreating from the light. Elena sat frozen, the card still on the table. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, her mind racing. She didn't know it yet, but her life had just split into before and after. Before Dante Caruso, and after. Asterisk like this story if you've ever felt the world shift beneath your feet in a single moment. Sometimes fate doesn't ask permission, it just arrives at asterisk. Elena couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed, the city sounds drifting through her open window, the hum of distant traffic, the murmur of voices from the street below. Normally, these sounds lulled her into rest, but tonight, they only amplified the restlessness coiling in her chest. The black card sat on her nightstand, catching slivers of moonlight. She'd stared at it for an hour after returning home, turning it over in her hands as though it might reveal some hidden message. But it remained silent. Just a number, nothing more. Who was Dante Caruso? And why had he looked at her the way he did? As though she was something precious and fragile, something that might disappear if he looked away. Elena turned onto her side, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. She thought of his voice, the way it softened when he mentioned his mother. She thought of the scar on his jaw, the controlled power in his movements, the way his men obeyed him without question. He was dangerous. She knew that. Every instinct told her to throw the card away, to forget the encounter, to go back to her small, safe life. But she didn't. Instead, she tucked the card into the drawer of her nightstand and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come. It didn't. The next morning, Elena woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of her grandmother's humming. She dragged herself out of bed, her body heavy with exhaustion, and padded into the tiny kitchen where Mim stood at the stove, stirring a pot of something that smelled like home. Boao, ma chérie, Mim said without turning around, her voice warm and familiar. Boao, Mim, Elena replied, sinking into a chair at the small table. Her grandmother turned, her eyes sharp despite her age. You look tired. Bad dreams. Elena shook her head. Just couldn't sleep. Mim studied her for a moment, then set a bowl of porridge in front of her. Eat. You work too hard. Elena picked up her spoon, grateful for the distraction. She didn't want to talk about last night. She didn't want to explain the strange pull she felt toward a man she didn't know, a man who moved through the world like a storm waiting to break. But Mim had always been able to read her. Something happened, the old woman said, settling into the chair across from her. Elena hesitated. It's nothing. Just a strange night at work. Strange how? Elena sighed. There was no point in lying. Mim would pry it out of her eventually. There was a man, she began slowly. He asked to speak to me. He gave me his number. Mima's eyebrows rose. A man? What kind of man? I don't know, Elena admitted. But powerful. Dangerous, maybe. Her grandmother's expression darkened. Elena. I'm not going to call him, Elena said quickly. He was kind, in his own way. He reminded me of someone who's been hurt. Mime reached across the table and took Elena's hand. Be careful, mon car. Men like that, they bring trouble. Elena nodded, squeezing her grandmother's hand. I know. But even as she said it, she felt the weight of the card in the drawer, pulling at her like gravity. The bistro was busy that night. Elena moved through her shift on autopilot, her mind elsewhere. She kept glancing at the corner table, half expecting to see Dante sitting there, watching her with those unreadable eyes. But he wasn't there. The table remained empty all evening, and Elena told herself she was relieved. She wasn't. Check the description box below for more stories that speak to the soul. Sometimes we need to lose ourselves in someone else's journey to find our own asterisk. As the night wore on, Elena felt a strange sense of disappointment settling over her. She scolded herself for it. What had she expected? That he would return? That he would sweep her into some grand romance? This wasn't a fairy tale. This was real life, and men like Dante Caruso didn't belong in her world. But just as she was clearing the last table of the night, the door to the bistro opened. Elena looked up, and her breath caught. Dante stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, his dark hair slicked back. He looked different tonight, less controlled, more raw. His eyes found hers immediately, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. He crossed the room in long strides, ignoring the curious glances from the remaining staff. Elena, he said, his voice rough. She set down the plates she'd been holding, her heart racing. What are you doing here? I needed to see you. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Why? She whispered. Dante's jaw tightened. He looked like a man waging a war within himself. I don't know, he admitted, but I can't stop thinking about you. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. She should walk away. She should tell him to leave. But instead, she found herself stepping closer. I don't even know you, she said softly. I know. His voice was barely audible. But I want you to. Before she could respond, one of his men appeared at the door, his expression urgent. Boss, the man said in Italian. We have a problem. Dante's entire demeanor shifted. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by cold, hard authority. He turned to the man, his voice sharp. What is it? Riccardo's men. They are moving tonight. Dante cursed under his breath. He looked back at Elena, regret flickering across his face. I have to go, he said. Who's Riccardo? Elena asked, fear creeping into her voice. Dante hesitated. Someone who wants me dead. The bluntness of the statement stole her breath. Then don't go, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Dante's expression softened. He reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing against her skin. I'll come back, he promised. I swear it. And then he was gone, disappearing into the rain-soaked night. Elena stood frozen, her hand pressed to her cheek where his touch still lingered. She didn't know it yet, but the danger had already begun. The attack came without warning. Elena was walking home from the bistro, her umbrella held against the drizzle, when she heard the screech of tires behind her. She turned just in time to see a black van pulling up to the curb. Her instinct screamed at her to run, but before she could move, two men jumped out and grabbed her. She tried to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth. She fought, kicking and thrashing, but they were too strong. Within seconds, she was shoved into the van, and the door slammed shut. Terror flooded her veins as the van sped off into the night. One of the men bound her wrists with rough rope, while another pressed a gun to her temple. "Quiet!" he hissed in accented French. "Or I'll kill you right now." Elena's body went rigid with fear. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Who are you?" she managed to choke out. "What do you want?" The man with the gun laughed darkly. "Your bait, little bird. Dante Caruso's weakness." Elena's blood ran cold. They knew about her. Somehow, they knew. The van drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. When it finally stopped, Elena was dragged out into a warehouse, cold, damp, and reeking of oil and rust. She was thrown onto a chair, her hands tied behind her back. A man stepped out of the shadows, tall and thin, with eyes like chips of ice. "Elena Moreau," he said, his voice smooth and cruel. "How lovely to finally meet you." "Who are you?" she demanded, though her voice trembled. "Ricardo," he said simply. "And you, my dear, are going to help me destroy Dante Caruso." Elena's heart pounded. "I don't know anything." "You don't need to," Ricardo interrupted. "You just need to exist. Dante will come for you, and when he does, I'll be waiting." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Tell me, does he care for you? Or are you just another disposable plaything?" Elena spat in his face. Ricardo's expression twisted with rage. He struck her across the cheek, and pain exploded through her skull. "Tie her tighter," he snarled to his men, "and make sure Dante knows where to find her." As rough hands yanked the ropes until they cut into her skin, Elena closed her eyes and thought of Dante's promise. I'll come back. She prayed he would, because if he didn't, she was already dead. Tell me in the comments how this made you feel. Stories like this live because of you, because you let them into your heart. Dante Caruso was not a man who prayed. He'd stopped believing in mercy the day he watched his father bleed out on a rain-soaked street, gunned down by men who smiled as they pulled the trigger. He'd stopped believing in grace when he was forced to become something harder, colder, more ruthless than the world that tried to break him. But tonight, as he stood in the rain outside the bistro where Elena should have been finishing her shift, he found himself whispering words he'd forgotten he knew. Please. Not had. Anton approached, his face grim, water streaming down his coat. He handed Dante a phone, the screen showing a photograph that made his blood turn to ice. Elena, bound to a chair, a bruise blooming across her delicate cheek, her eyes wide with fear but still defiant, still burning with that fierce light he'd seen when she spoke French to the elderly woman. Below the image, a message, come alone, or she dies. The old textile factory on Rue de la Morte. Midnight. Dante's hands shook, not with fear, but with a rage so pure it felt like fire in his veins. "Boss," Anton said carefully, "it's a trap." "I know. We need a plan. We need backup." "No." Dante's voice cut through the rain like a blade. He said, "Come alone." "You can't actually." Dante grabbed Anton by the collar, pulling him close. "She's there because of me, because I was selfish enough to speak to her, to touch her, to make her visible to my enemies." His voice cracked, just barely. "I won't let her die for my sins." Anton's expression softened. In all the years he'd known Dante, he'd never seen him like this, unraveled, vulnerable, human. "Then let us follow at a distance," Anton said quietly. "Let us give you a chance." Dante released him, nodding slowly. "Stay back. Don't move unless I signal. If things go wrong." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Get her out, even if it means leaving me behind." Anton wanted to argue, but he knew that tone. The conversation was over. The old textile factory loomed against the night sky like a corpse, broken windows, rusted metal, the skeleton of industry long dead. Dante approached on foot, his gun concealed beneath his jacket, his mind running through 1,000 scenarios and discarding each one. There was no good way out of this. Riccardo wanted blood, and he would have it one way or another. But if Dante could buy Elena's life with his own, he would do it without hesitation. Asterisk if this moment touched your heart. Don't forget to subscribe. Some stories demand to be shared, to be remembered. Asterisk. The factory doors hung open, creaking in the wind. Dante stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Overhead, a single work light swung gently, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. And there, in the center of the space, was Elena. She sat bound to a metal chair, her head bowed, her dark hair falling across her face. Blood stained her sleeve. Dante's vision went red for a moment, his hands curling into fists. "Elena," he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. Her head snapped up. Relief and terror warred in her expression when she saw him. "Dante," she breathed. "No, you shouldn't have." "Quiet," a voice interrupted, smooth and venomous. Riccardo stepped out from behind a pillar, a gun dangling lazily from his hand. He was smiling, the kind of smile that spoke of cruelty enjoyed, of power savored. "Dante Caruso," Riccardo said, spreading his arms wide. "Right on time. I was worried you might disappoint me." She was in his home now, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, hidden behind tall gates and ancient trees. Last night, he'd brought her here, refusing to let her return to her tiny apartment where she might still be vulnerable. A doctor had come, an older man with kind eyes who'd cleaned her wounds, given her something for the pain, and told her she was lucky. So lucky. She hadn't felt lucky. She'd felt shattered. But Dante had stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand, murmuring reassurances in French that made her heart ache. Now, in the pale morning light, Elena sat up slowly. Her body was sore, her wrists bandaged, but she was alive. The door opened softly, and Dante appeared, carrying a tray. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, his shirt rumpled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "You're awake," he said, relief flooding his features. "How long did I sleep?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse. "About 6 hours." He set the tray on the bedside table. Tea, toast, fruit. Simple, gentle food. "How do you feel?" "Like I was kidnapped by a madman and nearly killed," she said, attempting a weak smile. Dante winced. "Elena." "I'm okay," she interrupted quickly. "Oh, I will be." He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her. "You shouldn't have to be okay after what happened. You should never have been in that position." Elena reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Stop blaming yourself." "How can I not?" His voice was raw. "You were taken because of me." "And I'm alive because of you," she countered firmly. "Dante, if you hadn't come, I would have torn the world apart to find you." The intensity in his words made her breath catch. She studied his face, the sharp lines, the exhaustion, the guilt eating away at him. "Then believe me when I say I don't regret meeting you," she said softly. "Even after all of this." Dante's eyes closed, and for a moment he looked like a man at prayer. When he opened them again, they were glassy with unshed tears. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Maybe not," Elena said, a hint of her old spirit returning. "But you're stuck with me anyway." A broken laugh escaped him. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, reverently. "My mother would have liked you," he said after a moment. "She always told me to find someone who saw past the armor, someone who wasn't afraid of the man underneath." Elena's heart squeezed. "Tell me about her." And so he did. As the morning light grew stronger, Dante told her about his childhood in Paris, about a mother who taught literature and loved poetry, about a father who'd been dragged into darkness and taken his family with him. He told her about the choices he'd made, the things he'd done, the man he'd become. He laid himself bare before her, offering her every scar and shadow, expecting her to recall. But Elena only listened, her hand never leaving his. When he finally fell silent, she leaned forward and pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me." Dante's arms came around her, pulling her close. They sat like that for a long time, two broken people finding wholeness in each other. The days that followed were strange and tender. Dante insisted Elena stay at the estate until he was certain no other threats remained. She'd called her mother and Mime, carefully explaining that she was safe, that she was with someone who cared for her. Mime had been skeptical. "This man, is he good to you?" Elena had looked across the room to where Dante stood speaking quietly on the phone, his brow furrowed with concern over something she couldn't hear. "Yes," she'd said. "He is." Dante's home was beautiful but cold, a place built for defense rather than comfort. Elena found herself wandering the empty halls, feeling like a ghost in someone else's life. But slowly, things began to change. She started cooking in the massive, underused kitchen. Dante would find her there in the evenings, flour on her nose, trying to recreate her grandmother's recipes. He'd sit at the counter and watch her, sometimes helping, sometimes just existing in her presence. One night, as she pulled bread from the oven, he said, "I could get used to this." Elena glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "To bread?" "To you," he said simply. "Here, with me." Her hand stilled on the hot pan. "Dante." "I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you have a life, a family, a job you need to get back to. But I need you to know," he stood, crossing to her. "I want this. I want mornings with you. I want to hear you hum while you cook. I want to fall asleep with you in my arms." Elena set down the bread, her heart pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying stay," Dante said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Not because you're in danger, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to. Because this," he gestured between them, "is real, and I don't want to let it go." Elena's throat tightened. 1,000 practical objections rose in her mind. She barely knew him. Her life was elsewhere. This world he lived in was dangerous, complicated. But when she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw a future she'd never imagined for herself. A future where she wasn't alone. "Okay," she whispered. Dante's eyes widened. "Okay. I'll stay," Elena said, stronger now. "But on one condition." "Anything." "You let me bring Mime and my mother here. I won't leave them unprotected, and I won't live separated from them." Dante's face broke into a smile, genuine, radiant, transforming him into someone younger, lighter. "Done," he said. "I'll have rooms prepared for them by tomorrow." Elena laughed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're serious?" "Completely." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Whatever you need, Elena. Whatever makes you happy." She tilted her face up, and he kissed her, soft at first, then deeper, pouring all his hope and fear and love into the contact. When they finally parted, both breathless, Elena rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she said. "I should have said it before, but I was afraid." "Of me?" "Of how much I felt," she admitted. "Of how quickly everything changed." Dante's hand cupped her cheek. "I'm afraid too, but I'm more afraid of losing you." "Then don't," she said simply. "Just don't." He kissed her again, and in that moment, the world felt right. Asterisk if you've ever taken a leap of faith for love, the terrifying, beautiful kind, you'll understand this. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Asterisk. 3 months passed like a dream Elena kept expecting to wake from, but never did. True to his word, Dante had brought her mother and Mime to the estate. He'd converted an entire wing into apartments for them, spacious, comfortable, filled with light and the things they loved. Her mother had wept with gratitude. Mime had simply looked at Dante with those sharp old eyes and said, "You hurt my granddaughter, and no amount of money or power will save you." Dante had smiled. Understood, madam. The estate transformed. What had been cold and empty became warm and alive. Elena filled rooms with flowers. Her mother gardened, creating beauty in the neglected grounds. Mime held court in the kitchen, teaching Elena and even Dante her recipes, grumbling about his heavy hand with the salt. And Dante changed. He still had business to attend to, calls to make, meetings to hold. But Elena noticed the shifts. He turned down jobs that would have required violence. He invested in legitimate ventures. He started talking about getting out completely, about building something clean for their future. You don't have to do this for me, Elena said one evening as they walked through the gardens. I'm not, Dante replied, his arm around her waist. I'm doing it for me, for the man I want to be when I look at you. Elena stopped walking, turning to face him. The setting sun cast gold across his features, and she was struck again by how beautiful he was, not just physically, but in the quiet strength he carried, the tenderness he showed only to her. Marry me, she said suddenly. Dante froze. What? Elena laughed, surprised by her own boldness. I said marry me. I know it's supposed to be the other way around, but I don't care. I love you, Dante Caruso, and I don't want to wait anymore. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then a slow, wonderful smile spread across his face. Yes, he said. Yes, Elena. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her there among the roses, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. I had a ring, Dante said, reaching into his pocket. I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside was a simple band with a single diamond, elegant, understated, perfect. Oh, Elena breathed. It was my grandmother's, Dante said softly. The only thing I have left of her. I wanted you to have it. Elena's tears fell freely now as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. I love you, she said again, because she couldn't say it enough. I love you, he echoed, pulling her close. Forever, Elena. I promise you forever. The wedding was planned for spring, a small, intimate ceremony in the estate's garden, with only the family and the few people Dante trusted with his life. Elena had never wanted anything grand. She wanted wildflowers and sunlight, her grandmother's blessing, and the man she loved waiting for her at the end of a simple aisle. But as winter settled over the city, bringing frost and early darkness, Elena began to notice changes in Dante that worried her. He was distracted, tense. He'd wake in the middle of the night, his body rigid beside hers, staring at the ceiling as though searching for answers in the shadows. When she'd ask what was wrong, he'd pull her close and murmur that it was nothing, just old ghosts. But Elena knew better. One evening, she found him in his study, surrounded by papers and ledgers, his face drawn with exhaustion. Anton stood nearby, speaking in rapid Italian that she'd learned enough to partially understand. Can't trust Marcello anymore. He's been meeting with the Costello family. Need to secure the ports before. If they move against us. Elena cleared her throat from the doorway. Both men looked up, and she saw something flash across Dante's face. Guilt, maybe, or fear. I'll come back, Anton said quietly, slipping past Elena with a respectful nod. She entered the study and closed the door behind her. What's happening? Dante leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Nothing you need to worry about. Don't do that, Elena said firmly, crossing to stand before his desk. Don't shut me out. We're supposed to be partners. He looked up at her, and the weariness in his eyes made her heart ache. There are parts of my world I don't want touching you. They already have, she reminded him gently. Riccardo took me, remember? I've already seen the worst of it. Dante flinched. And I've spent every day since trying to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. Elena moved around the desk and perched on the edge, taking his hand in hers. So tell me what's wrong. Let me help carry it. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he exhaled. When I dismantled Ricardo's operation, I took territory that other families had been eyeing, he said quietly. I thought I'd secured agreements, understandings. But some of them see my changes as weakness. Your decision to go legitimate, Elena said. He nodded. They think I'm vulnerable, that I've gone soft. His jaw tightened, and they are testing me. How? Small things, challenges to my authority, whispers that I'm no longer the man I was. He met her eyes. They are not wrong. Yes, they are, Elena said fiercely. You're stronger now. You have something to fight for that matters. Dante's hand came up to cup her face. You matter, and that terrifies me, because it gives them leverage. Elena's stomach clenched with understanding. They are threatening me. Not directly, not yet, but if they think they can use you to control me. He trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Sometimes the hardest part of love is letting someone see your fear. If this moment resonates with you, leave a comment below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself. Then what do we do? We. Dante shook his head. No, I handle this. We're getting married in 4 months, Elena said. That makes this our problem, not just yours. Elena. No. She slid off the desk and stood before him, her voice calm but resolute. I chose this life. I chose you. And I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be locked away while you fight alone. Dante stood, towering over her, but she didn't back down. If something happened to you, I'd never forgive myself for not standing beside you, she interrupted. We face this together, Dante. That's what partners do. For a moment, she thought he might argue, but then his shoulders sagged, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You're going to make me crazy, you know that, he murmured against her hair. Good, she said, wrapping her arms around him. Keeps things interesting. Despite everything, he laughed, a real laugh that she felt rumble through his chest. When he pulled back to look at her, there was something new in his eyes. Not just love, but respect. Partnership. Okay, he said. Together. The first real threat came 2 weeks later. Elena had gone into the city to meet with the florist about the wedding arrangements. Dante had been reluctant to let her go, but she'd insisted. She refused to become a prisoner in her own life. He'd sent 2 guards with her, discreet but watchful. She'd learned not to argue about security anymore. The flower shop was tucked into a quiet street near the old quarter, a charming place run by an elderly woman named Margot who reminded Elena of her grandmother. They'd spent an hour discussing roses and lilies and baby's breath, and Elena had left feeling lighter than she had in days. She was walking back to the car when she noticed the man. He was leaning against a lamppost across the street, watching her. Not hiding it, wanting her to see. Elena's guards noticed too. They moved closer, flanking her, the hands drifting toward concealed weapons. The man smiled. Then he touched his fingers to his forehead in a mocking salute and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. It happened so quickly that Elena almost convinced herself she'd imagined it, but the tension in her guards' bodies told her otherwise. Miss Elena, one of them said quietly, we need to get you home. Now. She didn't argue. The drive back to the estate felt endless. Elena kept replaying the moment in her mind. The man's smile, the deliberate way he'd looked at her, the message implicit in his presence. We know who you are. We can reach you. When they arrived home, Dante was already waiting at the door, his face carved from stone. Anton must have called ahead. Inside, Dante said, his voice clipped. Elena followed him to his study. The moment the door closed, he spun to face her. Did he touch you? Say anything? No, Elena said. He just looked at me. But Dante, he wanted me to see him. It was a message. I know. His hands curled into fists. It was from Marcello, one of his men. What does it mean? Dante's jaw worked. It means he's declaring his intentions. He wants me to know he can get to you whenever he wants. Fear flickered through Elena, but she pushed it down. So what do we do? You stay here, Dante said immediately. No more trips into the city. Not until this is resolved. For how long? However long it takes. Elena's temper flared. So I'm supposed to hide while you handle everything. I'm supposed to keep you alive, Dante shot back. That's my job, Elena. Protecting you. And what about protecting yourself? She demanded. Or does that not matter? Not as much as you do. The raw honesty in his voice stole her breath. They stayed at each other, the air crackling with frustration and fear and love all tangled together. Finally, Elena crossed to him and took his face in her hands. I'll stay, she said quietly, but you have to promise me something. Anything. You end this quickly. Whatever needs to happen, you do it and come back to me. Her voice cracked. I can't lose you, Dante. I won't survive it. His arms came around her, and she felt him shaking, this powerful man reduced to trembling by the thought of losing her. I promise, he whispered. I swear on everything I am, I'll come back to you. She believed him. She had to. The next 3 days were tense and strange. Elena remained at the estate, keeping herself busy with wedding preparations and helping her mother in the garden. But the joy had been leached from it, replaced by a constant low hum of anxiety. Dante was gone more than he was home, meeting with his people, shoring up alliances, preparing for whatever confrontation was coming. When he was home, he was distracted. He'd hold Elena at night, but she could feel his mind elsewhere, running through strategies and contingencies. On the third night, he came to her room late. Elena was sitting by the window, watching snow fall in the garden below, unable to sleep. Elena, he said softly from the doorway. She turned. Something in his face made her chest tighten. What is it? He crossed to her, kneeling before her chair and taking her hands in his. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with Marcello. On neutral ground. There are witnesses, mediators. It should be safe. Should be, Elena repeated, her voice hollow. I'm going to offer him a deal. Territory, money, whatever it takes to end this peacefully. And if he doesn't want peace? Dante's silence was answer enough. Elena's fingers tightened around his. Then don't go. Let Anton handle it. Or. I have to, Dante said gently. If I send someone else, it shows weakness. This only ends if I face him directly. Tears burned Elena's eyes. I don't want you to go. I know. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing them tenderly. But I have to protect our future. I have to make it possible for us to have the life we've planned. I don't care about that life if you're not in it, she said fiercely. Dante rose and pulled her up with him, crushing her against his chest. I will come back to you. I swear it on my life, Elena. I will come back. She clung to him, breathing in his scent, memorizing the feel of his arms around her. That night, they made love with desperate tenderness, as though they could somehow hold back the dawn through sheer force of will. Afterward, Elena lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, praying it would still be beating tomorrow. Marry me now, she whispered suddenly. Dante's hand stilled in her hair. What? Tonight. Right now. She lifted her head to look at him. I don't want to wait. I don't want there to be any chance that we. Her voice broke. Please, Dante, marry me tonight. For a moment, he just looked at her, his eyes shining in the darkness. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. Okay, yes. They woke Mime and Elena's mother. They called a priest Dante trusted, an old man who'd known his family in Paris and had moved here years ago. Within 2 hours, they were standing in the estate's small chapel, just the 5 of them and Anton standing witness. Elena wore a simple white dress she'd bought for the official ceremony. Dante wore his suit. Neither of them cared about the lack of flowers or music or guests. All that mattered was the vow. I, Dante Caruso, take you, Elena Moreau. I, Elena Moreau, take you, Dante Caruso. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Dante kissed her with such reverence that Elena felt her heart might break from the beauty of it. I love you, he whispered against her lips. My wife. I love you, she whispered back. My husband. Subscribe if you believe in love that refuses to wait, that claims its joy even in the shadow of fear. This is how we survive, by holding tight to what matters most. They spent the rest of the night wrapped in each other, stealing every moment they could before dawn. And when morning came, Dante dressed in silence. Elena helped him with his tie, her hand steady even though her heart was breaking. At the door, he turned back to her one last time. Wait for me, he said. Always, she promised. And then he was gone. The hours that followed were the longest of Elena's life. She tried to distract herself, helping Meme bake bread, sorting through wedding fabrics with her mother, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into darkness. But every sound made her jump. Every car on the drive sent her heart racing. Anton had stayed behind with extra guards, and his presence should have been comforting. But Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept checking his phone. By afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. She found Anton in the hall outside Dante's study. Have you heard anything? She asked. Anton's face was carefully neutral. The meeting is still ongoing, Mrs. Caruso. Mrs. Caruso. The name sent a thrill through her despite everything. That's good, right? Elena pressed. If they are still talking, it means. Anton's phone rang, cutting her off. He answered immediately, speaking in rapid Italian. Elena watched his face change, watched fear flicker across his features before he locked it down. We'll be there in 10 minutes, he said, and hung up. Anton, Elena said, her voice trembling. What happened? He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There was a problem, he said carefully. The meeting, it didn't go as planned. Where is he? Elena demanded. Where's Dante? Hospital, Anton said. St. Catherine's. He's alive, Mrs. Caruso. But Elena didn't wait to hear the rest. She was already running toward the door, grabbing her coat, her whole world narrowing to a single desperate need. Get to him. Get to Dante. Anton caught up with her, and together they raced through the falling snow toward whatever waited at St. Catherine's Hospital. Elena prayed with every fiber of her being that she wouldn't arrive too late, that the vow they'd made only hours ago, till death do us part, wouldn't be tested quite so soon. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. Elena's shoes squeaked against the linoleum as she ran through the corridors, Anton's hand firm on her elbow, guiding her through the maze of sterile white walls. Nurses looked up as they passed, registering the urgency in their faces, the desperation. Where's he? Elena's voice was raw, barely her own. 3rd floor. Emergency surgery, Anton said tightly. This way. The elevator felt like a coffin. Elena pressed herself against the wall, her breath coming in short gasps. She'd been strong all day, holding herself together through sheer will. But now, with Dante somewhere in this building, bleeding, possibly dying, her composure was cracking like ice under too much weight. Please. She prayed to a god she wasn't sure was listening. Please don't take him from me. Not now. Not when we just... The elevator doors opened. The 3rd floor was chaos. Doctors rushing, alarms beeping, the sharp urgent voices of trauma. Anton led her past it all to a small waiting room where 3 of Dante's men stood, their faces grave, their clothes stained with blood. Blood that belonged to her husband. What happened? Elena demanded, her voice breaking on the last word. The youngest of them, Marco, she remembered his name was Marco, stepped forward. Mrs. Caruso, the meeting. Marcello brought weapons. It was supposed to be neutral ground, but he… Where's he? Elena interrupted. She didn't care about the politics or the betrayal. She only cared about one thing. Surgery, Marco said quietly. He was shot. Twice. Once in the shoulder. Once. He hesitated, glancing at Anton. Once where? Elena's fingernails bit into her palms. His side. Near the liver. Anton's voice was steady, but his eyes were dark with worry. They're working on him now. The doctors said the next few hours are critical. Critical. Such a small word for something so catastrophic. Elena's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Anton hadn't caught her, guiding her to a chair. He was wearing protection, Marco added quickly, desperately trying to offer comfort. A vest. But the second shot, it came from behind. Someone he trusted. Betrayal. Even in his own ranks. Elena doubled over, her hands pressed to her mouth to hold back the sob building in her throat. This was her nightmare made real. The thing she'd feared from the moment she understood what Dante's world truly meant. Asterisk like this story if you've ever feared losing the person who made you whole. Sometimes love asks us to be braver than we ever thought possible. Asterisk. Minutes turned into hours. Elena sat rigid in that waiting room chair, her eyes fixed on the door through which the doctors would eventually emerge. Her mother and Meme arrived, summoned by Anton. They sat on either side of her, holding her hands, their presence the only thing keeping her tethered to oath. Meme prayed in French, her voice a low murmur, the familiar words washing over Elena like a balm. Anton paced. The other men stood guard by the door, as though Marcello's people might burst through at any moment. The clock on the wall ticked forward with agonizing slowness. 3 hours. 4. Finally, a surgeon emerged, still in his scrubs, his mask hanging loose around his neck. He looked exhausted. Elena was on her feet before he could speak. Is he? He's alive, the surgeon said, and Elena's knees buckled again. Her mother caught her this time, holding her upright. The surgery went as well as could be expected. We removed the bullet, repaired the damage to his liver. The shoulder wound was clean, through and through. Can I see him? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. He's in recovery now. He'll be moved to ICU shortly. The surgeon's expression softened. He's not conscious yet, but you can sit with him. He'll need familiar faces when he wakes. If he wakes. The words hung unspoken in the air. Elena nodded mutely. The surgeon gave Anton a few more details, medical jargon she couldn't process, and then a nurse appeared to lead her through the double doors. The ICU was quieter, dimmer. Machines beeped softly, monitoring the invisible line between life and death. And there, in a bed surrounded by monitors and tubes and wires, was Dante. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. He looked so pale, so fragile, nothing like the powerful man who'd held her last night. His chest rose and fell with mechanical regularity, assisted by a ventilator. Bandages wrapped his torso and shoulder, and 4 dripped clear fluid into his arm. She approached slowly, as though moving too quickly might shatter him. You can touch him, the nurse said gently. Talk to him. They say patients can hear, even in this state. Elena nodded, unable to speak. The nurse left, giving them privacy. Alone with him, Elena sank into the chair beside his bed. Her hand found his, so cold, so still, and she wrapped both of his around it, trying to warm it with her own heat. I'm here, she whispered. I'm right here, Dante. You promised you'd come back to me, remember? You promised. His fingers didn't twitch. His eyes didn't open. But his heart kept beating on the monitor, and that was enough. For now, that had to be enough. Elena laid her head on the edge of his bed, still holding his hand, and let the tears finally come. Time lost meaning in that hospital room. Day bled into night, bled into day again. Elena barely left his side. Her mother brought food she couldn't eat. Meme brought prayers. Anton brought updates on the situation outside. Marcelo had gone into hiding. Dante's people were hunting him. The other families were watching to see who would emerge victorious from this war. Elena didn't care about any of it. All she cared about was the man in the bed before her, fighting his way back from the edge of death. On the second day, they removed the ventilator. Dante breathed on his own, which the doctors said was a good sign. But he still didn't wake. Elena talked to him constantly, filling the silence with memories, with plans for their future, with every silly detail of her day. She told him about the flowers blooming in the garden at home, about Mime's new recipe for cassoulet, about the baby bird her mother had found and was nursing back to health. She told him she loved him approximately 1,000 times. And still, he slept. On the third day, Elena was reading to him from one of his beloved books, Crime and Punishment *, the one he'd been carrying that first night, when she felt it. The slightest pressure. His fingers, squeezing hers. She stopped mid-sentence, her heart leaping. Dante. His eyelids fluttered. Dante, can you hear me? Another squeeze. Stronger this time. Elena's free hand flew to the call button, pressing it frantically. His waking up. Someone, please. Within seconds, nurses swarmed the room, checking monitors, shining lights in his eyes, adjusting machines. Elena was pushed back, and she wanted to scream at them to let her near him, but she understood they were helping. Finally, blessedly, Dante's eyes opened. Confusion clouded them at first. He blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, his brow furrowing. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Don't try to talk, a nurse said. Your throat will be sore from the ventilator. Just rest. But Dante's eyes were searching, panic beginning to build in them. I'm here, Elena said, pushing past the nurses to his side. Dante, I'm here. His gaze found hers, and relief flooded his features. His hand reached for her, trembling with weakness, and she caught it, bringing it to her cheek. You're okay, she said, tears streaming down her face. You're going to be okay. He tried to speak again, and this time a sound emerged, hoarse, barely audible. Anna. Sure, don't talk. Save your strength. She kissed his knuckles. You scared me half to death. You know that. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough. The nurses finished their assessment and gave them a few minutes alone. Elena pulled her chair as close as possible, refusing to let go of his hand. 3 days, she told him quietly. You've been out for 3 days, but you're going to recover. The doctors say you'll make a full recovery. Dante's eyes drifted closed again, exhausted by even those few minutes of consciousness. But before he slipped back into sleep, he managed 3 words that made Elena's heart sore. Love you, wife. She laughed through her tears. I love you too, husband. So much. Tell me in the comments if you've ever sat vigil for someone you love. Sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is the waiting, trusting they'll come back to you. Dante's recovery was slow but steady. Each day, he stayed awake a little longer, spoke a little more clearly, regained a little more strength. By the end of the first week, he was sitting up, demanding to know what was happening with his business, frustrated by his own weakness. Elena had never been so relieved to see him annoyed. But there were complications, nightmares that made him wake gasping, reaching for weapons that weren't there. Moments of darkness when he stared at nothing, his jaw clenched, reliving the betrayal. Tell me what happened, Elena said one evening, sitting on the edge of his hospital bed. He was strong enough now to have real conversations, and she needed to understand. Dante's hand tightened on hers. We sat down to negotiate. Marcelo, me, 2 neutral mediators. It was supposed to be safe. His voice was bitter. But one of my own men, Enzo, someone I'd trusted for years. He was on Marcello's payroll. He shot me from behind. Elena's blood ran cold. Where's he now? Anton handled it. The flatness in Dante's voice told her everything she needed to know about Enzo's fate. And Marcello? Still hiding. Dante's eyes met hers, and she saw the predator lurking beneath the surface, wounded but not defeated. But not for much longer. What are you planning? Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. I'm planning to finish this, Dante said quietly, once and for all, so we can have the life we promised each other. Elena wanted to argue, to beg him to let it go, to walk away from all of it, but she'd learned enough about his world to know that walking away wasn't an option. Not unless he wanted to spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. Then let me help, she said. Dante's eyes widened. Absolutely not. You said we're partners, Elena interrupted. You said we face things together. Not this, Elena. This is. What? Too dangerous. Too dark. She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. Dante, I didn't marry you thinking it would be easy. I married you knowing exactly who you are and what your world demands. So stop trying to protect me from it and let me stand beside you. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, he said. But Elena. I know, she said softly. I know the risks. But I'd rather face them with you than hide from them alone. Dante pulled her down into a careful embrace, mindful of his injuries. How did I get so lucky? He murmured against her hair. You didn't, Elena said with a faint smile. I got lucky. You're stuck with me now. He laughed, a real laugh, and the sound of it was the most beautiful thing she'd heard in days. Dante was released from the hospital after 2 weeks, against his doctor's strong advice. But he'd convinced them, or perhaps intimidated them, into agreeing, promising bed rest and round-the-clock care at home. Elena had turned one of the estate's ground-floor rooms into a recovery suite, so he wouldn't have to manage stairs. She'd filled it with books, soft blankets, and sunlight, everything meant to heal not just his body but his spirit. But Dante was restless. She could see it in the way his eyes tracked movements outside the windows, the way his hand drifted unconsciously to where his gun would normally rest. Anton visited daily, bringing reports. Dante's organization was holding strong in his absence, but Marcello was rallying his own forces. It was only a matter of time before the next move was made. We need to draw him out, Dante said one evening, sitting up in bed surrounded by maps and documents. Elena brought him tea, herbal, to help him sleep, though she knew he'd barely touch it. How? Dante's eyes met hers, and she saw the calculation there. He wants me, specifically me, if I make myself visible. No. Elena's voice was sharp. You're not using yourself as bait. It's the only way to end this quickly. Or to get yourself killed. Elena set the tea down harder than intended. Dante, you nearly died. You're still recovering. This is insane. I know. His voice was calm, reasonable, which only made her angrier. But every day I wait, I give him time to plan, to gather resources. The longer this drags on, the more danger everyone is in, including you. Elena wanted to argue, but she couldn't deny the logic. She'd seen enough of this world to understand that weakness, perceived or real, invited attack. Then we need a better plan, she said finally. Something that doesn't put you in the line of fire again. Dante studied her face. What are you thinking? Elena moved to sit beside him on the bed, careful of his wounds. Marcello wants you, but what he really wants is to break you, right? To prove he's stronger. Yes. Then we give him what he thinks he wants. She took his hand. We make him think you're more vulnerable than you are, that I'm the weakness he can exploit. Dante's expression hardened immediately. Absolutely not. Listen, Elena interrupted. We let word spread that I'm alone somewhere, unguarded. An easy target. He'll send someone, maybe come himself if he's arrogant enough. And when he does, you're waiting. Using you as bait. Dante's voice was ice. No, never. Why not? It's the same plan, just with me instead of you. Because if something goes wrong, his voice cracked. Elena, I can't lose you. I won't. She squeezed his hand tighter. And I can't watch you throw yourself into danger over and over. So either we do this together, with precautions and backup, or we spend the rest of our lives running from shadows. Subscribe if you understand that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust the person we love to make their own choices, even when those choices terrify us. Dante closed his eyes, the internal war playing on his face. Elena waited, letting him process, letting him come to the conclusion she knew he would. Finally, he opened his eyes. If, and this is a massive if, we do this, you're wired, armed, and surrounded by guards he can't see. Agreed. And if at any point I think it's going wrong, you pull me out immediately, Elena finished. I know. He pulled her close, careful of his injuries. I hate this. I know, she murmured, but it's the only way we get our life back. They spent the next week planning with military precision. Anton scouted locations and mapped out sightlines. Dante's men were positioned strategically, concealed but ready. Elena was fitted with a wire so thin she could barely feel it, and given a small weapon she practiced with until her hands no longer shook when she held it. The trap was set. Word was carefully leaked that Elena would be visiting her old workplace, La Rose Blue, to finalize arrangements with the owner. That she would be there Thursday evening, after closing, with minimal security. It was a lie, of course. The bistro would be empty except for Dante's people, hidden and waiting. But Marcello wouldn't know that. Thursday came with heavy clouds and the promise of rain. Elena dressed carefully that morning, nothing that would restrict movement, shoes she could run in if necessary. She tried to eat breakfast, but her stomach was tied in knots. Dante watched her from his seat at the kitchen table, his face drawn. He'd insisted on being part of the operation despite still recovering. Elena knew better than to argue. You don't have to do this, he said for the 100th time. We can find another way. There is no other way, Elena replied, echoing his own words from weeks ago. Not one that ends this quickly. She crossed to him and knelt, bringing herself to his eye level. I'm going to be fine. You'll be watching the whole time. And the second anything feels wrong, I'm out. Dante cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. Promise me. I promise. He kissed her, soft and lingering, as though he could memorize the feel of her lips through touch alone. When they parted, he whispered, Come back to me. Always, she promised. The bistro felt eerie in its emptiness. Elena walked through the front door as the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the windows. The tables were bare, chairs upturned on their surfaces. Dust motes danced in the dying light. She moved to the bar where she used to work, running her fingers along the familiar wood. So much had changed since those simple days of saving wine and smiling at strangers. The wire at her collar picked up her breathing, transmitted it to the van 2 blocks away where Dante and Anton monitored everything. I'm in position, she said quietly. Copy that. Anton's voice whispered through the nearly invisible earpiece. We have eyes on all entrances. Elena took a slow breath, steadying herself. Now came the hard part, waiting. Minutes ticked by. The sky outside darkened. Rain began to patter against the windows. Then, movement. The back door opened with a soft creak. Elena's heart leaped, but she forced herself to remain calm, to continue looking through the old receipts she'd brought as props. Footsteps. Multiple sets. She turned slowly, as though surprised, as though afraid. 3 men stood there, and in the center, wearing an expensive coat and a smile that made her skin crawl, was Marcello. Mrs. Caruso, he said, his voice smooth as silk. How careless of you to be here alone. Elena backed up against the bar, letting fear show on her face. Not hard, since she was genuinely terrified. What do you want? Revenge, Marcello said simply. Your husband took everything from me, so I'm going to take everything from him. He pulled out a gun, and Elena's world narrowed to that small black muzzle pointed at her chest. Wait, she said, raising her hands. Wait, please. No more waiting. His finger began to squeeze the trigger. Time seemed to slow. Elena saw everything with crystal clarity, the satisfaction in Marcello's eyes, the bored expressions on his men's faces, the rain streaking down the window behind them. And then the world exploded into violence. The front windows shattered as Dante's men burst through. The back door crashed open. Marcello spun, firing Will. Marcello spun, firing wildly as Dante's men flooded the bistro from every entrance. Elena dropped behind the bar, her hands over her head, the sound of gunfire deafening in the enclosed space. Through the chaos, she heard Dante's voice shouting commands, directing his people with precision even as his own weapon discharged. He'd positioned himself at the front entrance, refusing to stay in the van despite his injuries. One of Marcello's men went down, then another. But Marcello himself was moving, using the confusion to slip toward a side door Elena hadn't even known existed, an old service entrance hidden behind a curtain. He's running! She shouted into her wire. Southeast corner. She saw Dante's head snap toward her position, so the moment of decision cross his face. Chase Marcello or secure Elena first. She made the choice for him. Elena grabbed the gun from her jacket pocket and pushed herself up, racing after Marcello before Dante could stop her. She heard him roar her name, heard footsteps pounding after her, but she was already through the service door and into the alley behind the bistro. Rain pelted her face. The alley was dark, lit only by a single flickering street lamp. Marcello was 20 feet ahead, running toward a car idling at the end of the block. Elena raised her weapon with both hands, the way she'd been taught. Stop! Marcello turned, and in the dim light, she saw his gun coming up. She fired. The recoil jolted through her arms. Her shot went wide, sparking off the brick wall beside Marcello's head. He returned fire, and Elena dove behind a dumpster, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Then Dante was there, materializing from the rain like an avenging angel. He put himself between Elena and Marcello, his own weapon steady despite the pain that must have been screaming through his healing wounds. It's over, Marcello, Dante's voice cut through the rain. Your men are dead or captured. There's nowhere left to run. Marcello laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. You think this ends with me? There will always be someone else. Someone younger, hungrier. You can't escape what you are, Dante. Maybe not, Dante said quietly, but I can choose what I become. Marcello's gun swung toward Elena again. Then watch your wife die, and we'll see how. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Dante's struck Marcello in the chest. Marcello's went wide as he fell, the bullet embedding itself harmlessly in the dumpster beside Elena's head. Marcello collapsed into a puddle, the rain washing his blood toward the gutter. His eyes stared sightlessly at the sky. For a moment, everything was silent except for the rain. Then Dante was pulling Elena up, his hands running over her frantically, checking for injuries. Are you hurt? Did he hit you? I'm fine, Elena gasped. I'm okay. He pulled her against him, so hard she could barely breathe, but she didn't care. She wrapped her arms around him and held on, feeling him shake, whether from pain, fear, or adrenaline. She couldn't tell. You promised to stay behind the bar, he said hoarsely against her hair. He was getting away. I don't care. Dante pulled back to look at her, rain streaming down his face, his eyes blazing. I don't care if he got away, Elena. I don't care if every enemy I've ever made comes for us. Nothing is worth risking you. Elena's hands came up to frame his face. Then it's a good thing I'm fine. We're both fine. Anton appeared at the mouth of the alley, weapon drawn, relaxing when he saw them. All clear, boss. The bistro is secured. No civilian casualties. Dante nodded without looking away from Elena. Get the cleaners here. I want this handled quietly. Already on it. Anton hesitated. You should sit down, boss. You're bleeding. Only then did Elena notice the red spreading across Dante's shirt, darkening the fabric. The exertion had reopened his wounds. Hospital, she said firmly. Now. For once, Dante didn't argue. Asterisk, if you've ever loved someone so fiercely that their safety mattered more than your own, you understand this moment. Like this story if it's touching something real in you. Asterisk. The second hospital stay was shorter than the first. Dante's wounds had reopened but hadn't sustained new damage. The doctors stitched him back up, lectured him about the definition of bed rest, and released him with even stricter orders that Elena fully intended to enforce. But something had shifted. With Marcello dead and his organization scattered, the immediate threat had passed. Other families, seeing Dante's willingness to defend what was his with lethal force despite his injuries, backed off. Word spread, Dante Caruso was still not a man to cross. More importantly, they understood he had something worth fighting for. And a man with something to lose was the most dangerous kind. Within a month, Dante had consolidated his position, made his final arrangements to transition his remaining operations to trusted lieutenants, and began the process of truly going legitimate. It wouldn't happen overnight. His world didn't allow for clean exits, but he was committed to the path. Elena watched him change, not into someone unrecognizable, but into a fuller version of himself. The hard edges remained. They always would, but they were balanced now by softness, by hope, by the quiet joy he found in simple domesticity. She found him one morning in the estate's library, surrounded by papers. But these weren't business documents or territorial maps. They were architectural plans. What's this? Elena asked, setting down a cup of coffee beside him. Dante looked up, a boyish excitement in his eyes that she rarely saw. A bakery. Elena blinked. What? You told me once, months ago, that you'd always dreamed of opening a bakery. Somewhere warm and welcoming, where people could gather. He spread out the plans. I found a property in the old quarter. Perfect location, good bones. I thought, if you still wanted. Elena's throat tightened with emotion. In everything, the danger, the chaos, the violence, he'd remembered the small dream she'd mentioned once in passing. Dante, she whispered. He stood, suddenly uncertain. If you don't like it, or if it's too much, we can. She kissed him, deeply, thoroughly, pouring everything she felt into the contact. When she pulled back, she was crying. It's perfect, she said. You're perfect. He smiled, truly smiled, and pulled her into his arms. Then we'll build it together. A new beginning. Spring arrived like a benediction, transforming the estate grounds into a riot of color. Elena stood in the garden, her hands deep in soil, planting herbs that would eventually make their way into the bakery. Mime worked beside her, offering advice in French about drainage and sunlight, the same lessons she'd taught Elena as a child. The bakery construction was underway. Elena visited the site almost daily, watching walls rise, watching her dream take physical form. Dante often came with her, despite his continued recovery. He'd lean against door frames and discuss details with contractors, his input surprisingly thoughtful. He knew about building things to last, even if his previous constructions had been empires rather than businesses. What do you think about skylights? He asked one afternoon, pointing to the ceiling. Natural light for the morning crowd. Elena looked up, imagining sunshine streaming through glass. I love it. Dante made a note on his ever-present clipboard. He'd thrown himself into this project with the same intensity he'd once devoted to territory and power. But this was different. This was creation rather than destruction, hope rather than fear. You're enjoying this, Elena observed, amused. He glanced at her, a hint of sheepishness crossing his features. "Is that so surprising?" "A little," she admitted. "I never imagined you as the type to obsess over which tile to use in a bakery bathroom." "Neither did I," Dante said quietly. He set down the clipboard and crossed to her, pulling her close. "But I've never had something worth building for. Not like this." Elena rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Steady, strong, alive. "We're really doing this, aren't we? Building a normal life." "As normal as we can manage," Dante replied with a hint of humor. "Though I suspect our version of normal will always be slightly left of center." She laughed. "I can live with that." Check the description box below for more stories about love that rebuilds, that chooses hope even after darkness. Sometimes the most radical thing we can do is choose softness. The bakery opened on a warm May morning, 6 months after that first night Elena had spoken French to an elderly woman and changed both their lives forever. They'd named it *La Deuxième Chance*, the second chance, a name that held layers of meaning for both of them. Elena wore a simple dress and an apron embroidered with the bakery's name. Mime had made it for her stitches small and precise. Dante stood beside her at the door, wearing casual clothes that still somehow looked expensive, his arm around her waist. "Ready?" he asked. Elena looked at the line of customers already forming outside, at the warm glow of light spilling through the windows, at the display cases filled with pastries she and her mother had spent the morning preparing. "Ready," she said. They opened the doors together. The first customer was an older woman who reminded Elena of the grandmother from that fateful night. She ordered in hesitant French, and Elena responded in kind, the language flowing easily. The woman's face lit up with recognition and gratitude. Some things, Elena thought, come full circle. The day was a blow of flour and laughter and the constant ring of the register. Neighbors came to welcome them. Former colleagues from La Rose Bleu stopped by, marveling at Elena's transformation from waitress to entrepreneur. Even Anton appeared, looking decidedly uncomfortable in civilian clothes, but smiling as he bought enough pastries to feed his entire team. Dante moved through the space with quiet pride, refilling coffee, clearing tables, utterly content in this role that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Near closing time, as the last customers filtered out and Elena was wiping down counters, she found Dante standing at the front window, staring out at the street. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "How different everything is," he said softly. "A year ago, I was a man who thought power and fear were the only currencies that mattered. And now," he gestured to the bakery around them, "now I measure success in croissants sold and happy customers." "Any regrets?" Elena asked carefully. Dante turned to her, his eyes clear and certain. "Not a single one." He pulled her close, and they stood there in the golden late afternoon light, surrounded by the smell of bread and sugar, two people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to build something bright. That night, back at the estate, Elena found Dante in the library, his refuge, the place he went when he needed to think. But tonight, he wasn't working. He was simply sitting by the window, a book unopened in his lap, watching the stars emerge. "Penny for your thoughts," Elena said from the doorway. He looked up, his face softening. "Just thinking about my mother, wishing she could see this." "CS." Elena crossed to him and settled into his lap, careful and familiar. "Tell me about her." And so Dante did. He told her about a woman who'd loved literature and laughter, who'd tried to shield her son from the violence that eventually consumed his father. He told her about the songs she'd sung, the stories she'd told, the way she'd made their small apartment feel like a palace with nothing but love and imagination. "She would have adored you," Dante said, his hand gentle in Elena's hair. "She always told me to find someone who could see both sides of me, the hard and the soft. Someone who wouldn't try to change me, but would help me become more myself." "She sounds wise," Elena said softly. "She was." Dante was quiet for a moment. "After my father died, after I chose this life, I stopped calling as much. I couldn't bear the disappointment in her voice. Eventually, I stopped calling at all. It's not too late, Elena said. You could reach out now. Show her what you're building. Dante's arms tightened around her. Maybe it's time. I think she'd be proud, Elena said. I think she'd see how far you've come. Because of you, Dante said firmly. Everything good in my life now exists because you spoke French to a stranger and I was lucky enough to hear you. Elena tilted her face up to kiss him. We saved each other. We did, he agreed. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen, both of them thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The violence and fear, yes, but also the courage, the choice to believe in something better. Tell me in the comments, do you believe people can truly change? This story says yes, that love can be the catalyst for becoming who we were always meant to be. Eventually, Elena stayed. I should check on Meme. She was tired after today. Go, Dante said, kissing her forehead. I'll be up soon. But as Elena reached the door, she turned back. Dante. Yes. Call your mother tomorrow. She deserves to know her son is happy. He met her eyes across the room, and she saw the emotion there, gratitude, love, the vulnerability of a man who'd finally learned it was safe to be soft. I will, he promised. And Elena knew he would keep that promise, just as he'd kept every promise he'd made to her. 2 years slipped by like water through open fingers, not rushed, but fluid, each moment savored even as it passed. La Duxem Chance had become a beloved fixture in the neighborhood. People came not just for the pastries, though Elena's croissants were legendary, but for the warmth, the welcome, the sense that this was a place where everyone belonged. Elena had hired a small staff, including 2 young people from difficult backgrounds whom Dante had quietly recommended. Giving second chances, it seemed, had become their shared purpose. The estate had transformed too. What had once been a fortress now felt like a home. Meme tended her ever-expanding garden. Elena's mother had taken over the kitchen, her cooking rivaling anything from Elena's childhood. The halls that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with laughter and life. And Dante had become someone even he didn't quite recognize in the best possible way. He'd completed his exit from the criminal world, a process that had taken patience, negotiation, and no small amount of money to buy his way out of obligations and territories. Some of his former associates thought he'd gone soft. Others, seeing the steel still present in his eyes, understood he'd simply chosen a different kind of strength. He now ran several legitimate businesses, real estate, import-export, investments, all of them clean, all of them legal. He'd even begun teaching business strategy at a local university, enjoying the challenge of mentoring young minds without the weight of violence behind every decision. But the biggest change came on a crisp autumn morning when Elena woke to find Dante missing from their bed. She found him in the nursery they'd been slowly preparing, a sunny room on the 2nd floor with windows overlooking the garden. He stood in the center of the empty space, his hand resting on a rocking chair they'd bought the week before. Dante, Elena said softly from the doorway. He turned, and she saw tears tracking down his face. I called my mother yesterday. Elena's breath caught. He'd been working up to it for months, the fear of rejection warring with his desire for reconciliation. What did she say? She cried, Dante said, his voice rough. She said she'd been praying every day that I'd find my way home. Not to Paris, but to myself. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I told her about you, about the bakery, about this. He gestured to the room around them, to the future it represented. And Elena prompted gently. She's coming to visit next month. She wants to meet you. To see. His voice broke. To see if we're going to fill this room. Elena's hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach. They'd been trying for a few months now, hopeful but not desperate, trusting that it would happen when it was meant to. And what did you tell her? Elena asked. Dante crossed to her, dropping to his knees before her and pressing his forehead against her belly in a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "I told her I hoped so," he whispered. "I told her I wanted to be a father, that I wanted to give a child everything I never had, safety, peace, a love that didn't come with conditions or consequences." Elena's fingers threaded through his hair. "You'll be an amazing father." "I'm terrified," he admitted against her. "What if I don't know how? What if the darkness in me—" "There's light in you too," Elena interrupted firmly. "So much light, Dante. I see it every day. Our child will see it too." He looked up at her, his eyes still wet, and she saw in them the boy he'd once been, the one who'd lost too much too young, and the man he'd become through sheer force of will and love. Asterisk like this story if you believe in redemption, in the possibility that our past doesn't have to define our future. This is the message we all need to hear. Asterisk. 3 months later, on a snowy December evening, Elena sat in the bakery after closing, doing inventory while Dante locked up. They'd developed a routine. She handled the business side, he handled security, and together they'd built something sustainable and beautiful. "Elena," Dante called from the front. "Come here for a second." She set down her clipboard and walked to the main room, finding him at the front window. "Look," he said softly, pointing outside. Snow was falling in thick, lazy flakes, blanketing the street in white. And there, visible through the window of the cafe across the way, was an elderly couple, the same couple Elena had helped that feist night at La Rose Bleu. They were sharing a dessert, laughing, the hands intertwined on the table. "They've been coming to the neighborhood more often," Dante said. "I think they like knowing you're here." Elena leaned against him, watching the couple. Everything came from that night. One small act of kindness, and my whole life changed. "Our lives," Dante corrected gently. "Our lives," Elena agreed. As they stood there, Dante's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and Elena saw his expression shift. Surprise, joy, something profound. "What is it?" He turned the phone to show her. An email from his mother, with an attachment. A photo of a young Dante, maybe 8 years old, sitting in a Paris kitchen, covered in flour, grinning at the camera. The subject line read, "Asterisk, you always wanted to open a bakery. I'm so proud you finally did. With all my love, Mom and—" Asterisk. Dante's hand shook slightly as he held the phone. "I'd forgotten. When I was a child, I used to tell her I wanted to make bread like the baker down the street from us. I wanted to make people happy with food." Elena's throat tightened with emotion. "You did it. You finally did it." "We did it," he corrected, echoing her earlier words. That night, as they drove home through the snow, Elena worked up the courage to tell him what she'd discovered that morning. She'd been waiting for the right moment, and somehow, tonight felt perfect. "Dante," she said softly, "pull over for a second." He glanced at her, concerned, but did as she asked, stopping on a quiet side street. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Elena took his hand, placing it on her stomach. "Everything's right. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Dante simply stared at her, as though he couldn't quite process the words. Then understanding flooded his features, followed by an emotion so intense it seemed to radiate from him. "You're sure?" he whispered. "I took 3 tests this morning. All positive." Elena smiled through sudden tears. "We're going to be parents." Dante pulled her across the console and into his arms, holding her as though she were made of spun glass. She felt him shaking, felt the wetness of his tears against her neck. "Thank you," he choked out. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." "We gave it to each other," Elena said, pulling back to look at him. In the dim light from the street lamp, his face was transformed, all the hard lines softened, all the shadows chased away by sheer, incandescent joy. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, his hand splayed protectively over where their child grew. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. Your mother is going to lose her mind, Elena said. In the best way, Dante agreed. He cupped Elena's face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I love you. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too, Elena said. And it doesn't terrify me at all. It just feels right. They sat there in the car, in the falling snow, holding each other and marveling at the life they'd built from such impossible beginnings. Asterisk if this story has touched your heart. Subscribe for more tales that remind us love can heal, that second chances are real, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is choose to be soft in a hard world. Asterisk. Dante Caruso's mother arrived in January, a small woman with silver hair and eyes exactly like her son's. She embraced Elena like a daughter she'd been waiting her whole life to meet, and when she placed her hand on Elena's belly there bump, she wept with gratitude. You saved him, she told Elena in French during a quiet moment in the garden. No, Elena replied gently. He saved himself. I just reminded him who he wanted to be. The older woman smiled, wise and knowing. That is the greatest gift of all. Spring came again, bringing with it the anniversary of the bakery's opening and the promise of new life. Elena's belly had rounded beautifully, and she glowed with the kind of contentment that came from being exactly where she was meant to be. Dante had become even more protective, if that were possible, but in a gentle way. He rubbed her feet when they ached. He woke in the middle of the night to satisfy bizarre pregnancy cravings. He talked to the baby constantly, his hand on her stomach, telling their child about the world they were building. One evening, as they sat in the nursery, now fully furnished and painted a soft yellow that caught the sunset, Dante held up a children's book his mother had sent. It's the one she used to read to me, he said. A story about a knight who gave up his sword to become a gardener. Elena smiled. Fitting. I used to think he was weak, Dante admitted, giving up power for something soft. But now. He looked around the room, at the crib and the changing table and the rocking chair. Now I understand. The strongest thing he ever did was choose to grow things instead of destroy them. Read it to me, Elena said, settling back against him. And so Dante read, his deep voice filling the room with the story of transformation and choice, while their child listened from within Elena's womb, and outside the window, the garden bloomed with possibility. The baby arrived on a warm August night, with Elena's mother and Meme waiting outside the delivery room and Dante holding Elena's hand through every moment. When the midwife finally placed their daughter in Elena's arms, tiny, perfect, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival to the entire hospital, Dante wept openly. She's beautiful, he whispered, his finger tracing the baby's impossibly small hand. She's perfect. What should we name her? Elena asked, exhausted but glowing. They'd discussed names but never settled on one, waiting to meet her first. Dante looked at his daughter, then at Elena, then back to the baby. Marguerite, he said softly, after my mother, and we'll call her Daisy for short. Daisy Caruso, Elena tested the name. I love it. The baby yawned, a tiny sound, and both parents laughed through their tears. Welcome to the world, little Daisy, Dante murmured, bending to press the gentlest kiss to her forehead. We're going to give you everything. Love, safety, laughter. A life where you can be anything you dream. Elena watched her husband with their daughter and felt her heart expand so much she thought it might boast. This man, who'd once dealt in violence and fear, now cradled this fragile life with such exquisite tenderness that she fell in love with him all over again. Thank you, she whispered. Dante looked up, his eyes shining. For what? For choosing us. For choosing this life. He leaned over carefully and kissed her, mindful of the baby between them. Thank you for giving me a reason to. 5 years passed in a heartbeat. Asterisk La Duxem Chance asterisk had expanded to 2 locations. Daisy started kindergarten, a bright, curious child who spoke French with her great-grandmother and helped her father plant vegetables in the garden. A son, Thomas, arrived 3 years after Daisy, completing their family in ways they hadn't even known were incomplete. The estate had become a gathering place. Dante's mother visited twice a year. Anton had gotten married and brought his wife to Sunday dinners. Elena's old colleagues from the bistro dropped by regularly. And every night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Dante and Elena would find each other in the garden, or the library, or simply their bedroom, and marvel at the life they built. "Do you remember that first night?" Elena asked one evening as they sat on their balcony, watching the sunset over the city. "Every detail," Dante said, his arm around her shoulders. "You in your waitress uniform, tired but so kind to that woman. The sound of your French. The way you looked at me like you could see past everything to who I might become." "I saw who you already were," Elena corrected gently. "You just needed permission to show it." Dante pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We've had a good life, haven't we?" "The best life," Elena agreed. "And it all started with a few words in French and a man who decided to listen." As darkness fell and stars emerged, they sat together in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen love over fear, hope over despair, and built something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. Inside, they could hear Daisy reading to Thomas, her voice carrying through the open window, speaking the same words of that old story about the knight who became a gardener. And Dante smiled, because he understood now, truly understood, that the greatest victory wasn't conquest. It was this, a warm home, children's laughter, the hand of the woman he loved in his, and a future bright with possibility. This was where the light lived, and he would guard it with everything he had for the rest of his days. Asterisk, and so our story ends where all the best ones do, not with an ending, but with a beginning, with the promise that love, when it's brave enough and patient enough, can remake even the most broken soul. If this journey has meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances, because we all deserve one. Every single one of us. Asterisk. Asterisk, thank you for being here, for listening, for letting this story into your heart. May you find your own second chance, your own person who speaks your language when the world feels foreign. And may you have the courage to answer when they call. Asterisk. Asterisk born knew it, wherever you are. Good night, and dream of beginnings. Asterisk.